Welcome back to Power Lunch Southern Africa. Now, let's kick off a very interesting conversation based on the very first African Consumer Psychographics Report. And it challenges how Africa is viewed by global investors, brands, and policymakers. It shows that Africa is not just a continent that is growing in a Western style in terms of the middle class, but instead it's a continent of financially fluid, shock-driven, and highly adaptive consumers. So this middle class that we're going to look at now makes up about 4 to 15% of the population, and most of them are called floating, according to the report, living on just $2 to $4 per day, moving in and out of vulnerability depending on life events. Let's jump into the report and see what it fundamentally tells us about the continent's middle class. And joining me is Tshegofatso Mosiane, lead research and strategy at Reconnected Group. Tshegofatso, thank you so much. Give us a synopsis of this report, and also how it came about that you felt that this was the best way to really change perceptions about Africa's middle class.
Okay, well, Dumelang Bagaishlo Bagisani. My name is Tshegofatso Mosiane, and I am the founder and lead strategist at Reconnected Group Africa. And we are aiming to become a boutique consultancy that helps businesses, investors, entrepreneurs, and executives actually win in Africa. And the reason why this report, we felt like it was a good report to spend our time researching and creating proprietary research around, was a lot of times when we come across these foreign investors and executives, it doesn't matter if you've had 30 years of experience or 30 minutes, there's a big propaganda wall, a big wall of assumptions, and a big wall of let's just say connectors that are misleading people actually when it comes to their investments into Africa. And we believe that sometimes, the truth is the best disinfectant, the sunlight is the best disinfectant. And with this report, we hope that we give people a better understanding of the fundamental market that they're approaching so that they can create products and systems and investments that actually work.
Tshegofatso, let's get into the detail of the report itself. What are some of the fundamentals that came out for how the middle class is operating and running their finances in the different parts of the continent?
Well, in different parts of the continent, I think we first need to recognize that we don't actually have a big middle class in Africa. Depending on the country, it's about 4 to 15% of the overall population. That is minuscule numbers. So really, they are what we call a floating class, where, like the rest of Africa, we are hypersensitive to price, we are hypersensitive to access, we are hypersensitive to resources because we know how easily we can slide down. So unlike in other countries or other regions where the middle class is spoken about with a level of comfort, we believe that the African middle class across the continent needs to be looked at with a higher level of paranoia and almost more risk management level products instead of things just tailored to their leisure. Because unfortunately, most of the middle class in Africa does not have the same security as their global counterparts.
So how do you see them once again positioning themselves within the middle class? How will the South African middle class utilize its money in terms of lending, in terms of their ability to regenerate their own income? How do they define and maintain their position as a middle class?
I think a lot of our research was based on income level and income stability, right? A lot of assets in Africa are credit based. A lot of middle class are largely living based on credit. So that is why there's so many credit based products based to them. And we from our research found that they are using their income stability to buy them higher levels of credit and not necessarily more assets of ownership. So that would mean things like buying what you need now, like groceries, things on your credit card, and then paying it back later because you have a fixed income every single month. They also define themselves as middle class in order what the income stability and the credit, the goods that they can access, either first or en masse. They also have more superficial markers of the middle class than their international counterparts, because like I said, a lot of the middle class in Africa are not as asset solid. They are mainly dependent on their income stability and their credit. So a big thing is that they have more superficial signals, maybe the kind of car rental you can access rather than the car ownership, things like that.
And of course, we have to make sure that we separate the fact that the continent is very broad and very different in terms of how the financial systems operate in each one. So we can look at the South African context mainly. And when we look at what is then how is spending governed? What makes people spend? How do they make decision? How do they pay? How do they build trust? And how do they see trust playing into their financial decisions?
Well, to be honest, one thing is still true. We are Africans first, and faith and religion, I feel like, is an underspoken about reason for a lot of psychographic motivation for consumers. A lot of our research really looked into faith and trust. And the way people talk about African markets, you would think that we buy every brand story. You know what I'm trying to say? Like, we buy into every superficial or marketing campaign, but really a lot of times we tie a lot of our trust and faith in institutions, in brands, in products, in businesses is really tied to faith. In the report, we do a little case study on how the Motsepe Foundation used their relationship with the ZCC Church in order to gain more trust, and how that filters out to other Motsepe related products like their Time Bank free accounts. So it is very much how do I put this? It's very much the cornerstone, as we think, of trust. Because faith in institutions, in governments, in Western structures have, in 2026 to 2030 anyway, have almost fallen apart. So a lot of times, even when you see now with brands in Southern Africa, they are pulling from different religious institutions like the Apostle Church, African spirituality, all those things, even more than they would a few years ago, where they maybe would have prioritized pulling from Western trends and Western reports.
Very interesting, and you're definitely right. It's not something we probably don't feel comfortable stepping and having the real conversation around some of these financial decisions that consumers are making, and that's where and what moves money. But there are some elements or archetypes that make this market also sensitive. What affects this market the most, and do they sit on the brink of getting out from middle class to low and then trying to climb back in again? And what could be the things that cause that?
Well, I think there's a bigger risk of you slipping down the totem pole than up the totem pole. And well, this is only volume 1 of the report. We are making a volume 2. And what we are finding is that the research is like structural, right? Institutional. There was an investment banker, I forget his name, but he works for JP Morgan, and he wrote an article last year where he said that there's a lot of investment coming into Africa, but the top 15%, like our 1%, are not very trickle down economics wise. So the overall problem that the middle class is facing is the same thing that the lower classes and just the overall African system is facing. When you are working in a country or on a continent that is consumed by corruption to the point of many African nations, including South Africa, it is hard for you to be able to move up. That is period. And as things get more expensive and as people get more fragmented, it gets harder and harder for you to build something big enough to break out of the middle class, upwards, not downwards. So a lot of people, they have to sacrifice their income stability in order to change jobs or to start freelancing. They have to sacrifice their income level to quit their job or for mental health reasons or health reasons or so forth. It is larger structural issues that we will get deeper into in volume 2, but how that affects the mindset of the middle class specifically is that they're very protective, they're very paranoid. Like I said, there's faith-based trust, but then there's also social signaling that has become their 2 primary sources of coping with the situation, while they all know that they are actively, realistically at risk.
Very interesting, and congratulations on the first one. We look forward to it evolving and growing over the years. Thank you for your time. Tsogofatso Mosiane, lead research and strategy head, I assume, at the Reconnected Group. And thank you for joining us for that conversation.